How's it going, man? It's good to see you.
It's been a long time, huh?
It has been a long time. Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, we kept saying we were going to go for coffee. I said drinks.
No,
and then
you say we should go. I usually ignored those messages.
It's true.
But
It's
you never
true.
followed back.
No, you messaged me about watches. That was about it. You didn't want much more from me than that. You just wanted to pick my brain.
Yeah, I was looking for a watch. I thought, who better to take advice from than Brian?
I appreciate that. Did you get your watch?
I did get my watch.
It's a beauty.
Do you like it?
I love that handpiece.
Nice.
Tissot.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Not sponsored, by the way. Unless they really want to sponsor the show.
Why not? George loves free watches. Looks good on the wrist.
Thanks.
Little understatement. Not too big.
That's
not
right.
too small.
That's what I was going for. I don't want a Rolex like you do. Yeah, that's right. Hide it. How's it been? How you been, man?
I can't complain.
Yeah, you doing well?
No complaints. It's been 4 years since we tortured each other at the office.
It's been it seems longer though.
Maybe was 2000. When did we work together?
I don't know. You have to tell me because I don't remember.
You know what? I think it was 2011, 2012.
11, 12.
Yeah.
It was right before the election?
Yeah.
Okay.
The year before.
Yeah. You were part of an internship program it's the Jewish community, basically. They get young people that are interested in politics to intern. It was about a year, less than a year, 8-9 months?
It was a 9-month internship. I had no clue what I wanted to do after Concordia. And I remember my mom took a clipping out of this Jewish newspaper called Canadian Jewish News. Yeah. And she's like, you should apply for this. It would be great. So I had done an undergrad in political science and put my application in. And then lo and behold, had an interview and ended up in your office for 9 months. 9 very interesting, felt a very short time, months. And that's what happened.
But tell me, first of all, you studied politics because you had no other idea what to do like I did, or were you even remotely interested in politics?
So I was super interested in politics, and my dad is a family law lawyer, and it seemed to have been the route that I was kind of, destined for, quote unquote. So I went towards politics, and I had done an undergrad in sociology, but on the side, I had always worked at summer camps and worked with children, and I was always interested in that. So it was a combination of, I think I want to go the law route. And I should backtrack and say before I got the internship, I had applied to law school. And I was waitlisted at the Faculty of Law at McGill, which was back then a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And but there was no spots for me. So I thought this was a nice thing to add to my CV. And yes, I did have an interest in politics. Somewhere on the back burner, I didn't know if it was a forever thing. And spending 9 months at your office, I knew it wasn't a forever thing after that. But yeah, so that's what got me there. And I ended up spending some interesting time there and definitely learned a lot of stuff.
Because see, that program first of all, it's an amazing program, right? To get all these youngsters that have even remotely an interest in public affairs. And we had a guy. Hold on, my phone is ringing. Okay. We had a guy before you, Josh, who we ended up keeping because we really loved what he had to offer us, and we kept him. And I don't think he's the only one. I think there are so many interns from that program that ended up maintaining a job, whether it's provincial or federal, which is fantastic. And then you come in and, we realized we're like, this is an internship for kids that are interested in politics. What's going on? You didn't seem like the person who was very inclined in the political affairs or public affairs. It showed me personally that I'm not so sure this is the path, right?
Oh, you made that very clear every day.
Yeah. You're making me seem like a monster.
Nah, not a monster.
But so what were you thinking? Like, you just did that primarily because it might be a good idea to add this onto my resume. It'll open up some doors eventually if I want to get into law. Like, was that the only thing, or were you just curious to see what could happen?
Definitely not. I think I was a young, eager 23, 24-year-old guy, somewhere around that age. And I walked into the office, and at first I have to say, it was to add to the CV.
Yeah.
But I left every single day really with a smile on my face. And I would say 3 out of 5 days a week, we laughed so hard that we cried.
Yeah, it was fun.
So we had a good time, and I ended up definitely learning, built relationships. And the most important thing is, and I guess we'll get into it later, is I actually learned how to speak French a little bit
Yeah,
because I came in very Anglophone.
yeah.
And that was a little bit of a problem because I wasn't even allowed to answer the phones at the beginning. Keep Brian off the phones.
Yeah.
Keep Brian off the phones.
It's important, man, because you're in Quebec, right? So yeah, and we don't have that. Well, we do. It was a very particular writing that we have in this that we had in the sense that literally half of it was allophone and half of it was primarily francophone, right? So yeah, I think we panicked when we saw you. We're like, we need a francophone. What the hell? What the hell just happened here?
But I found my niche going to the older ladies' houses,
Yeah,
talking to them, bringing them stuff from the
yeah.
writing office. They
That's it.
liked me.
Yeah. Tell me what you took from this. Was it what you were hoping for? Was it a learning? Obviously, it was a learning experience, but what came out of this experience for you?
So that's a good question. I wish I remember. It must be saved on an old hard drive, but I had written a thank you letter to Federation CJA, which is the Jewish
Yeah.
organization that organized all these internships. And I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I remember being very satisfied with what I got out of it. And this might sound strange, but a lot of my satisfaction came out of it. Well, besides building, friendships and being able to chat with you 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, however long it was,
Yeah.
and just shooting the shit back and forth. I learned this is not what I want to do.
Mm.
And that was the best because there was no time wasted. There was lessons learned. There was relationships made. There was some travel. There was all this interesting stuff, which is super great. And I realized, okay, what's the next step?
Mhm.
And that's what brought me to my next step. I remember leaving the internship after 9 months, having about a month or 6 weeks off, and I had a new job set up.
Where?
Actually, within the Jewish community, they offered me a job as, I think it was the director of children's programming at the community center. And part of my mandate was actually to do programming for kids with special needs.
Mhm.
And I stayed there for 1 year. And that was basically right after the internship with you guys. And then that just kind of sprung me into, I guess, what my life is today. It was like my introduction.
Tell me, because we're going to get to what you're doing now because it's very interesting and I want to have that conversation. I think it's going to bring a lot of value to the people that are listening or that are watching. But you were so adamant on becoming a lawyer. I remember that that's the path that you wanted to go after so vividly, right? How did that change? I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to suggest that the time at the office that you spent there kind of changed your mind, but leaving the office, did you have at all in your mind that possibility to continue towards law?
No, I was done. There was a day at the office I remember. Um, Somebody in the office, you included, had a meeting with, I think, a local pastor or priest, and
Okay.
he had a daughter, a little girl. She must have been like 5, 6 years old. I guess she was either off school that day or was sick, and she couldn't obviously sit in your meeting. And you had asked me to entertain her.
I remember.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And so I came in and there's nothing in the office for kids. So I grabbed like a bunch of highlighters and papers and I literally just got on the floor and like was coloring with this little girl for like a couple, I don't know, 45 minutes or whatever during your meeting. And it's funny that that's one of my not funny memories, but memories that sticks out from the office because I guess that was partially,
That was like the eye opener.
what I was destined to do. I was always excited, for stuff every day, but that was something that sticks out. So I guess that might have been part of it, but I didn't necessarily leave saying no to law, no to politics, but I just felt it was very like, dude, you were stressed sometimes. Like there were some
Yeah.
very hard, stressful days and lots of back and forth from here to Quebec and lots of time on the phone. And I felt it was just not something like a guy in my 20s. It's not something I really wanted to set myself up
Mhm.
for. And yes, any job you do, I think you can make a difference. It doesn't matter if you're, flipping burgers, cleaning houses, working in politics, working as a daycare educator, can always find a way to have an impact on people.
Yeah.
But I just don't think it was the impact I wanted to have. And I think that was one of my things I took with it, uh, leaving. And I think you guys knew that all along, but we just had such a good time day to day. And I learned stuff, I learned stuff about politics. I learned how to properly research people. You taught me some French punctuation. So, yeah, so that was basically, yeah, I guess it was an eye opener in many ways.
What sucked is that I think I remember now the timing that you were there. Um, that you didn't fall at a time where we had to either prepare for an election or it was at an election time.
It was the year before I think you were
Yeah.
prepping for an election.
Yeah, that would have been fun for you to actually experience organizing and planning and actually, uh, seeing through a campaign because that's next level. That's like if you thought that we were going through stressful periods at work or the long hours of traveling and all that. I mean, when you see what goes on during a campaign, it's just insanity, insanity. But you had to come a couple times. I remember during the campaign. Am I
Yeah,
right?
I
Yeah.
came to help out the next year because it was before I went to
Mm.
graduate school, so I was still in the city, and I helped out a couple of times, and I also stayed involved. I think the next year, one of our colleagues, Josh, and we had started. I don't know if it was based on your recommendation, Association de Jeunesse pour l'Oreille d'Orient. And there was that
Oh
young
yeah. Okay.
leadership group. And I stayed involved for a little bit, came to the office for a couple of meetings, even though it really wasn't my thing. I think I just wanted to stay connected to you guys to some
Yeah.
extent. But yeah, I stayed on for that. And I kept paying for my liberal membership card.
That's something that always comes up, and I always feel a little disappointed because if there's something that we have failed at during those whatever 11, 12 years was that we never managed to really get youngsters engaged in politics. And we tried a few things here and there, but we never, maybe it was our fault. I don't know. Maybe we didn't see it through, or maybe it just wasn't the right timing, or I really don't know. And now that you mentioned that that young group there, yeah, that's another one that we had tried. I had forgotten about that one, and it just didn't. Nothing happened with that, and it's too bad. But now more and more, there's a lot of youngsters that are. Well, I don't know if it was always the case. I mean, there were always youngsters engaged. There was the youth wing of the party. So I don't want to suggest here that there's no youngsters involved in politics, but just locally with our association, with our riding, we had a hard time bringing youngsters to that level.
You had a very, in Parkex, there was a much older population of people living there,
Yeah.
like more our parents' age. And I think that was part of it. And I don't want to say I can guarantee, but I bet if we jump back into it today, just because of all these things with environmentalists and all these youngsters coming in, I think it would be a whole different ballgame.
Well, also the youngsters have, they're not young anymore, right?
That's true.
Like when we started in 2007, the 10-year-old kids today are at voting age, right? They're in their 20s.
That's true if you think about it.
So, there's a lot of time that has gone. So obviously things have changed.
We were the young office, by the way. We were the young people.
Yeah.
Josh, myself,
Mhm.
you.
I don't know how the other offices were. I don't remember the composition of the other offices. I mean, there were some youngsters, obviously, like youngsters. I don't want to, young adults, whatever. But yeah, no, we had a good dynamic. It was a lot of fun. But let me ask you something about the law thing because I know that you mentioned your dad. He's actually a very well known family lawyer. Was that something growing up that was imposed on you, or and not imposed like the negative way? Just here's the law practice. It would be fun if someone would take it over. Like, were you in that kind of environment?
I think culturally, and I think you would understand this because of your cultural background, there's somewhat of an expectation that success, even though I completely disagree with that today, because I know tons of people who are graphic designers and
Yeah.
driving around in $80,000
Yeah.
cars because they've built a business. But there was something culturally about, being successful as either, being a figurehead, being a lawyer, being a doctor, being a dentist, something like that. And I think although it was never directly, as the word you used, imposed on me, I think it was something that probably would have pleased my parents. And that's
Yeah.
something, especially the shit I caused them when I was a kid growing up. I think that was something that in the back of my mind, I knew was important to them. And it became important to me because I felt that even though I always loved working with kids, I felt that if I went into law, I can end up doing something with child advocacy rights
Yeah.
and doing something in the realm of what interests me anyways.
Yeah. How did they take the news when you finally decided that, law isn't what it's going to be?
You know what? I think that they really embraced it with open arms, to be
Mhm.
honest with you. I think listen, when a parent sees that their child is so happy and passionate about something, I really don't think that, or not think, but I really think it would be difficult for them to say, you know what, screw you. How could you do this to us? Like, you know, I think it was something that made me happy. I think they saw it. And, when I speak about what I do now later on, I think maybe you'll see people say like, oh, you have a glow when you
Hmm.
speak to yourself,
Yeah, yeah.
about what you do. So I think that they were happy with it. And you know what? To be honest, screw everyone who's not happy with what you're doing. You got to love what you do and wake up every day happy about it.
Hmm.
So I think it was okay.
For sure, absolutely. And I think your parents can see it too, right? I mean, it would be ridiculous to suggest that a parent that sees their child succeeding in what they enjoy and actually enjoying what they're succeeding in, um, it would be weird to, and I'm sure it exists, to have the parents uh, kind of pushing uh, for something else, right? Like to be persistent.
Well, I see that often every day in my work with the older clients I work with, like people measure success on so many things, whether it's, material, letters of education after, their names. And like, I guess later on, if you're interested in, how I pursued my further education, that's fine. But I don't think it's necessarily just letters after someone's name that makes them good at what they do.
Yeah.
I think it's passion, devotion, time. You know what I mean?
Well, especially today, right? I mean, there's so many tools out there, and like you mentioned before, graphic designers and all these other people, succeeding in what they're doing. And there's social media now. There's all these platforms that are available that can propel you to anything, right? I mean, it's not so much. What's going on with my phone? Jesus Christ. It's not so much the profession. I grew up also in an environment where, my parents never forced us to be anything, but there was always this suggestion. And I don't know, for some reason, the accountant ranked up there. No pun intended on any accountants listening to this, but for some reason, being a doctor, lawyer, and accountant were like up there on the list. I never understood.
It's the culture, my man. I'm telling you,
Accounting.
it's the
Yeah.
culture.
I took an accounting class in, I think it was CJIP. I can't remember. I knew right off the bat that there's no way in hell that I'm ever pursuing anything like this.
I knew when I started my business that there was no way I was going to ever touch those numbers because I would be screwed and be filing for bankruptcy pretty fast. So we outsource for that stuff.
And anything related to science as well. Like I knew that from at least Sec 3, Sec 4.
What's funny is I couldn't do sciences in high school, but my degree I finished my master's with is an MSc, which is a master's in science.
Yeah.
So funny, I couldn't do the sciences in high school. And
So
then
you went on to do your master's after the internship?
no. So what happened is when I was at the end of my internship, I remember it was probably end of May, beginning of June, that the internship was coming to an end. You guys took me out for a nice lunch, wrote me a card, which by the way, I think I still have and even know where.
You laminated it?
I laminated, gave it to my mom,
All proud.
Look what I did. But I finished that and I had already applied for this job. And I don't know if I was either offered the position or whatever, but it was either offered to me or I had applied, and it was starting at the end of August, beginning of September. And it was a 1-year job, like I said, like I had said originally, with the Jewish community that ironically was the same organization that got me this internship. So
Yeah.
I was working there for a year. And when I started working there, I knew this wasn't, my forever job making kids programs at a youth center. But it was one of my, I guess, an addition to the eye opener. And from then I just started applying to graduate schools, which was completely different than anything with related to law. And particularly became super interested in special needs and autism because it was on the rise. People know very little about it. And when I started doing research, the only thing that kind of messed with me is I'm like, crap, there's no programs in this province to teach about autism, ADHD, behavioral disorders, all that stuff. There's general stuff, but there wasn't really any focus on that.
Yeah.
So that's when I started looking to go to the States to go to school. And
Is that what you did? You went to the States?
Yeah.
Or you did it by at a distance?
Yeah. So basically what happened was I applied to a bunch of programs, and surprisingly, I was able to get into a lot of them. And I don't give myself a pat on the back for having the best grades. I think it was a combination of my letters of intent and how motivated I was by it. And also a lot of these American schools, they want the foreigners to come because it's quite expensive.
Yeah.
So I had applied and I didn't really want to move away, quote unquote, because I wanted to do some clinical work here because I knew that was a big part of the program, which lasted about a little over 2 years. So I did. The school I chose was actually, I would say, about 80% through correspondence. So a lot of the stuff was recorded online. I did a lot of live Zoom sessions and whatever the platforms were with my professors. And I didn't really have to travel to New York that much, but when I did, it was kind of right outside of Albany, so it was about
Oh, yeah, it's
a
not so far.
4 hour drive, and it really wasn't so bad. So I was here. I was getting some clinical experience working at an intervention center here, which I loved at the time, and doing my masters and doing all my clinical work all at the same time. So that was that. And if we want a timeline, I think I was with you, now that I think about it, probably 2011, because I started school in 2012. So maybe I was with you 2010, 2011, because
Okay.
I think graduate school I was 2012, 2013.
Okay.
See, I was never a numbers guy. I wasn't lying to
Yeah.
you. So yeah, so that's what brought me there, and I did my programming there, and it was great. It was one of those other eye openers to say like, shit, I'm in the right place. I
Yeah.
like this because I never liked school growing up. Did you?
Nah, no. Well, look, it depends how you like. I enjoyed school because of the people I was with, the friends and the experiences, and I that aspect I enjoyed it. The actual school part, like the learning and everything, oh, which kid does?
Did your parents send you to Greek school?
Yeah,
So I had to go to Jewish school.
yeah. But see, us, it was different because my elementary school, I went to an elementary school that is obviously it's a French school, but it belongs to the Greek community of Montreal. So they have a permit to have elementary schools, and I think they just got a permit for high school as well. So it's French.
Is that Socrates?
Yeah. So it's a French school, but they teach Greek and English as well. So it was every day we're exposed to the three languages. So I didn't go to Greek school during elementary school. Whereas kids that didn't go to that school, very often their parents would send them to Greek school during the weekend or after school hours, like at 4 or 5 o'clock, whatever. But after elementary school, when I went to high school, there's a Saturday program as well, which follows uh, the high school program of Greece. It's like 3 years high school and 3 years of, I don't know, whatever it's called, the lyceum or whatever it's called. So yeah, so I did Greek school all the way up until CGIP.
Same.
But
Except for Greek, it was more Jewish school. But I learned Hebrew from elementary school to
yeah,
high school. Tell me, do you still make use of the language
of
a lot
course,
today,
every
except
day,
with
every
except
single day.
with family or
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
out
yeah.
just outside?
Outside, well, not so much. I mean, there's no purpose for me to speak Greek outside. But when we were working in politics, we did because we had a large Greek population, right? So
Yes.
I used Greek every single day, whether it was for news articles or press releases or even communicating with the different associations, the community leaders, and so on. But no, now I speak Greek every day. Whether it's my parents, I speak Greek to my daughters. You don't? You, it's just based religion, like when you're doing your prayers and stuff.
I would say for the most part, I have a few family members that speak Hebrew, so just kind of to get my practice in. I mean, I would say I used to be fluent,
Yeah,
so I could still definitely hold a nice conversation. And I'll speak it once in a while, but I said like I'm not going on to the street to
yeah,
speak it. But if I recognize, a mother tongue language, it's nice, and you kind of hear it, and then you're like, oh, look, I also speak the language. It's
yeah,
nice.
yeah.
But yeah, I guess the education always plays a part in our growth and our development, and it brings you to
But
where you
see,
want to be.
to go back to the school, and if we enjoyed it, the Greek school that I went to, like in high school and in CEGIP, we had a lot more fun then. Probably because we were much more independent. We were kind of on our own. We actually became friends with the teachers of that school. It's weird because them too, they were just doing it on it was like a side job. I mean, they weren't necessarily teachers per se, right? They knew how to educate. They knew the material, and they were just working on Saturday teaching us. Uh, so yeah, it was a lot of fun actually. I really really enjoyed the Saturday school. Although some kids dreaded it, I actually enjoyed it. It's weird to say that.
So yeah, so we have it's exactly the same setup. It's so funny that you're telling me this in the Jewish religion. If you didn't go to a government funded if you went to like a government funded school and they wanted to learn Hebrew, it was usually like after school or weekend school.
Yeah.
But I ended up going for all of elementary and high school to I guess, and it was the private school system that offered Hebrew, so I learned it for lots of years.
Hmm.
They even tried teaching us in high school this dying language called Yiddish,
Yeah.
which basically nobody speaks anymore. And I'm sorry, man, I got zero understanding in that 5 years of that language.
Well, it's like ancient Greek. I mean, we studied ancient Greek for a little bit, but not in elementary school. Like later on, it's a different language. It's the basis of our modern Greek, but nobody, no, like, there's no way you should be using that language today. Nobody. It's like Latin.
No one
You're not going to
understands.
go outside and order a pizza in Latin, right?
Well, you could try. You're never gonna get your damn
you're, not,
pizza.
you're,
though.
you're not gonna get a pizza. So that's what it is. But it's a beautiful language, and I don't remember any of it, but in any case, I mean, there's some similarities because it's the root of our modern Greek language. But yeah, we studied that too. So Yiddish is like the ancient Hebrew.
I don't really want to answer that incorrectly, so I'm gonna say no. I think Aramaic is ancient Hebrew.
Yeah.
Yiddish was just like a language that I think a lot of the Jewish people spoke like pre or post like World War II and like
Oh, okay, it's
Holocaust
more
times.
recent. Okay.
So it might have been then, or even dating back before those times. But yeah, they tried to teach it to us. I can sing you a couple of songs,
No,
but I
no.
don't want to bore the
It's
viewers.
not a
Do
problem.
you have a piano?
Yeah, I do actually.
Should I?
You
Should
play
I?
piano?
No, I don't.
So then why the hell are
I,
you
don't-
asking for a
I thought you
piano?
were gonna play the piano.
Yeah. Um, Tell me a little bit about what you're doing now because it's interesting. You're working obviously with kids with special needs. I need to tell you that I was exposed to this at a very young age because my sister studied special care counseling. There was a program I think at Vanier or
Still is.
yeah, there still is. So she studied that, and then she worked quite a bit at the Summit, at the Summit School, and then she went back to school to get her full education diploma, and she's working as a teacher now. But yeah, I remember in elementary, or not, rather in high school, going through different experiences that my sister would relate to us about her studies and her internships and all that stuff. And there was it impacted me obviously. I mean, you're dealing with kids that have disabilities and obviously with their families. So you went on to create it. To tell me a little bit about your business right now. So it's called ABC Solutions. Tell me a little bit about ABC
So I'll
Solutions.
tell you about our company, which we're very proud of. So I'll give you. I think that it's important to know the backstory. So
Yeah.
I had said I'd gone to do this master's that was very much online, a little bit in person, based out of outside of New York. I graduated with a master's of science, ironically science, but it's a master's of science in autism and applied behavior analysis. So I'm not going to bore you guys with any details, but applied behavior analysis, also acronym is ABA, is basically the number one scientifically validated approach to work with children, not only with autism, but child development, children with special needs, all sorts of needs, whether it's behavioral issues, ADHD, severe behavioral stuff, obviously the different spectrums of autism. So my degrees that I did, it was a double master's, I think really helped me in the sense of bringing back that knowledge here. So in 2014, I met up with an old colleague of mine.
Sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you. Is that approach recognized here in Canada?
Absolutely, it's approach recognized in Canada. So I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm a specialist in in behavioral disorders and autism. But the education, I would say it's not that it's not recognized here because it is, but like, for example, like with insurance companies and stuff like that, that stuff is really still needs to come to Canada and more to this province a little bit. And back to politics, I think we're making headway to some extent, but the education was based out of the States, but it's definitely understood and used here in Canada a lot. But I think that's thank goodness, part of our success was being able to have that, over some other practitioners here, really knowing the ins and outs of autism and special needs. So ABC Solutions. So 2014, I met up with an old colleague of mine who ironically who had taught me a couple of trainings that I had done over the years. And I had known her from the past, and I always found her not to be very nice. Sorry, Alex. She was always tough on me, always told me I was a know-it-all. And she had already completed the degree that I had. She actually did it at University of Reno, Nevada, about 8 or 10 years before me. So quite a bit more, clinical experience. And she actually reached out to me on Facebook and asked me out to meet up. And she was married. I knew that, with children. And I thought to myself, oh, maybe she wants to go on a date with me. This is weird. And she reached out to me, and we had met up ended up being a dinner. And she basically was not interested in me to date in any way, or to come on to. And I'm like, oh, there goes my self-esteem with that one. But it was more to say, hey, I know you did this program. I think you had some learning to do. You did the learning. Let's get together. And from then, the business plan started, the brainstorming started, and we ended up coming together and incorporating what is now ABC Solutions Inc., ou en français Solutions ABC. And I will tell you guys, you want to know a little bit about what we do?
Of course. That's why you're here.
So that's why I'm here. So we started off with basically three of us: myself, my partner, Alexandra Rothstein, and another partner. Myself and Alexandra had basically the exact same education at the time. She obviously had more experience than me. She was more interested in early intervention, which is ages about, babies all the way up to about 3-4 years old, and I was more interested in kids elementary school and high school age. So we kind of figured out from the beginning which clientele she would be working with and which clientele I would be working with. We had no offices, we had nothing. Our third partner really was great with academics. And she put together a lot of academic interventions and stuff, trying to teach kids with special needs how to read, how to write, all that stuff. But we ended up actually breaking off just about almost a year ago. My third partner went off on her own, which was a great move for all of us. And she now does her own thing. So it's basically myself and Alexandra. And we built quite a nice team. So we have currently, I would say, about 13 to 15 interventionists that work for us. So basically what happens is, you said your sister studied special care counseling at Vanier or LaSalle. So that's basically a lot of what we hire. We hire people who graduate in special care counseling from here, and then we train them specifically either to be integration aides, shadows, and then they go into the daycares, into the schools, and they work with our clients. Because if you guys check out our website, one of our big things is we're huge believers in integration and having kids with special needs integrated into
regular
classrooms.
Yeah.
Why? Because a lot of these kids with special needs couldn't learn like every other child. And there's nothing I want more than my daughter, I have a young daughter, to learn acceptance. And I don't want to use the word tolerance, because it's not about tolerating, it's acceptance and understanding of children that might learn differently, speak differently, act differently. So we're very big on integration. So that's what a lot of our staff do day to day, is they're either trained by us in ABA to collect data and work with the kids one-on-one and in school settings or daycare settings. We have a speech therapist on staff, an occupational therapist on staff. And I should say that my business partner is about 6 months away from finishing her PhD. So she'll be able to do assessments and diagnostics. So basically the idea of ABC Solutions is to give parents kind of that one-stop shop. So when they call us, whether their child has a diagnosis of autism or ADHD, or there's just some concerns, we want to be able to sit down with the parents and say, we can offer you basically everything or almost everything you need under this one umbrella. We're going to guide you. Myself and my partner do a lot of what we call parent consulting or parent coaching, where we help the parents at our clinic or in the home environment, dealing with their children, behavioral outbursts, stuff like that. Cause that, stuff happens a lot. You have young kids, right? How many times you see your kid have a meltdown about not wanting to wear? Oh, really? I see that smirk on your face.
I swear to God.
You got perfect kids, man. My almost 18-month-old will, cry if it's not exactly what she wants to wear, if something's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And, when it comes to special needs, the thing is, it's all kind of cute and, oh, that's what it is. They're toddlers. But when your kid is, 12 years old or 14 years old and they're throwing chairs and having meltdowns, you really need to help the parents and guide them. So that's a lot about, what we do in the clinic and in the home setting. And over the years, I started doing a lot of one-on-one therapy. I see kids on a weekly or biweekly basis, and I deal a lot with kids that have anxiety, and also comorbid kind of means that there's a connection, and it's also quote unquote comes hand in hand with ADHD, autism, because a lot of kids on the spectrum suffer from anxiety, suffer from social issues. So I do a lot of one-on-one therapy at our office in the West Island, and it gives me the opportunity to work with lots of different kids. So on a given day, I'll see about 6 clients or patients, whatever you want to call them, and I get to go into schools and check out how our staff are doing and give them intervention plans and stuff like that. So we really get to move around a lot and do a lot. And you know what? Like I said before, I think we help people and we make a difference, and that's what's important.
No, no, guaranteed. Tell me, because you mentioned about working with families and then with schools. Do do you work separately? I mean, do they come to you, or do they find out about you through the schools that you're working in?
It's a very good question. So in our first year, we did, you probably know about this stuff a lot. We did Google Analytics
Mm.
and all these advertisements in Parent Today and all these magazines and newspapers. And reality we found is that the niche market of what we need and the demand is so high that advertisement really isn't that important because it's a lot of word of mouth. So to answer your question, we get a lot of recommendations from schools, from guidance counselors, from school psychologists. Lots of pediatricians will recommend when there's concerns, in the home or school setting. So it's mostly from doctors and from schools that people come through our doors, and we're really thankful to all these people because that's how business runs is through a good reputation and word of mouth, and that's really how people come to us. Or one happy client or family, we've helped their child through a difficult time, or an anxiety provoking event, and then they refer us to another family. So that's a lot of, I guess, how our business runs. And also we should say that in the past couple of years we've been working with a lot of kids that do not have special needs, that do not have a diagnosis. So we serve a lot of those kids too, because there's a lot of kids today that just struggle
Hmm.
for many different reasons.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand a little bit how you're getting into the school system, because the public school system over here obviously is served by the health department, right? We have the CLSCs and all that stuff, so they have their own people to that intervene in schools. Are you in that network, or are you just working with with a private sector?
Someone did their research. That is a booming good question. High fives.
All right.
There we go. Great question. So I would say a lot of our work, and where our shadows or integration aids are placed is within private schools, or private daycares. Now I'll go back just to answer your question. So there's two kinds of daycares. You have CPEs,
Yeah,
which are
the government.
daycares that are government funded. And when there's a child with a disability, and the disability doesn't have to be autism, it could be a motor delay, a problem with speech, something like that. They get a certain amount of money from the government as long as there's a recommendation made by a professional like myself or a social worker from the CLSC. So our staff are allowed in those government funded daycares because they get allocation to bring in private organizations like ABC
Right.
Solutions. Now, when it comes to the school boards, we're talking about uh, English Montreal School Board, Leicester be those school boards. Your question was great. Technically, they have their own people. Problem is I find that even though they have some amazing school psychologists, speech therapists, integration aides, the problem is the need today is so damn high that it's very hard to fill the needs of all these kids. So we're not allowed to send in our staff to work in integration. The school boards cannot pay ABC Solutions to do that. So with these people, lots of times the kids will leave school to come for therapy, which has nothing to do with the school because they have their own people. Some of the schools I forged really great relationships with, especially in the West Island of Montreal, because we've become, uh, you know, well known. So they will allow myself in or my partner in simply to do observations in the classroom or in the school setting. But we're technically not allowed to intervene because they have their own staff. And like you said, you have CLSC, you
Yeah.
have CROM, you have all these organizations that are mandated to work with the schools. So the schools, little by little, let us in to do a couple of things, but they have to be very vigilant of how much support we can give in the school because we're a private organization.
Right. So do you take on these patients then Does the school then recommend them on a private basis, like after school?
Yes, they are definitely allowed to do that. So they'll recommend, or I have kids, that will leave school and go home, and I'll have one of my interventionists work with them in the home setting. And a lot of these kids, who are on the autism spectrum, they can't do full days at school. So
Hmm.
they have half days and then they come home, and I have one of my staff, working with them anywhere from 6 to 20 hours a week,
Yeah,
doing intervention. And at the same time, they're working on social skills, academic skills, gross motor, fine motor, working on behaviors and stuff like that. So the important thing is that, these kids are getting what they need, but the schools have to be careful about doing it, under their roof, in terms of private
for
intervention.
sure. So then, uh, like you have like two little clusters. You have your intervention in schools and whatever mandate that you get, and then the private stuff that you work with the families directly.
Exactly. Yeah. And oftentimes what's important to note is that those things come together, right?
Hmm.
So I'll say to families, like, when they sign a contract to have an intervention put together for their child, I can work with your child. One of my staff can work with your child for 6 hours a week and, teach them to dress themselves, for example, or to be able to, prepare their own snack, or, how to calm themselves down after a meltdown. They could teach them these things. But the problem is, and I find where the gap is a lot, is you can have the best people teaching this to the kids, but what happens when the kid gets home and the parent has no idea how the child has learned how to deal with these
Right,
things?
right, right.
So that's why a lot of the time parents will send us videos so we can give them video feedback.
Hmm.
We'll even go into the homes and, train the parents, with whatever they're struggling with, so they understand what the child is working on,
Hmm.
and they can help their child in that home setting also.
Talk to me a little bit, because you mentioned before the importance about integration, having these kids kind of assimilated in a regular school with regular students. Um, is that is that on the rise, or is there still in Quebec or in Montreal separation between those schools?
Another amazing question. So here's the thing. Really, I'm impressed with your questions, Georgia. You sure I'm going to get a second high five?
All
We call
right.
this positive reinforcement in our field. It's on the rise. Integration is on the rise. And I'm going to tell you why. If you guys go back like 40, 50 years, they would quote unquote tell families of children with special needs that they should be institutionalized and they have no place in society. Okay. And I get the shivers when I tell you this, because it's so, I'm almost going to say, for lack of better words, wrong to say, but they label these kids as unable to learn, unable to communicate.
To function, yeah.
They even quoted them and referred to them as children with MR, mental retardation.
Hmm.
And we've grown so much from then. I mean, obviously the US, and even Ontario has, in my opinion, grown faster than Quebec, but we're growing. And
Why do you think that is?
I'm going to say that that there's more of an understanding. There's, like you were asking about the school boards. There's full teams now of in every, public school and all the systems for integration aides, school psychologists, social workers, where they do evaluations because they know that it's there. And in almost every classroom I go to, I'll go in for a child, and the teacher or the principal will say to me, "By the way, when you go into this class, this is not the child you're looking at. It's not the only child with needs."
Hmm.
So all the way up from kindergarten, all the way into high school, you're going into private schools, you're going into public schools. There are children being integrated, and the kids that really struggle and, get in the way of other kids learning, even these kids are in these classrooms. And what happens is they have break rooms for them. They'll give them shorter days.
Yeah.
Somebody will pull them out to do one-on-one with them. But the truth is we're big on integration today, and that's so important, not only for these kids but for our kids, to learn about what this is. And you know what, I got to tell you, some of these kids who I work with are, and I've been following for years, are past Sage app. I have two clients that I still consult for that are on, one at Concordia, one at McGill, driving cars.
Yeah.
These are kids with autism and ADHD. And not only are they contributing to society, but these are going to be people that are going to have careers,
Hmm.
and they're going to be just like you and I, and they're going to be valued members of society. And that's why integration is so important.
Do you think at some point the bureaucracy here in Quebec is so enormous that it's blocking this advancement? Because you mentioned the U.S. and Ontario and how fast they're advancing into this integration thing. Um, do you think government should kind of be more flexible with this?
I don't think it's a question of necessarily flexibility. I think it's a question of education and understanding, because what the government and people need to realize is these children are going to be the ones that are going to be running society when we're retired and we're elderly. So we got to open the doors and give as much opportunity as we can. And the thing is I should mention that ABC Solutions, we're in the private sector, right? So families either get some kind of grant from private foundations. I think Canadian Tire has one. There's a grant through the Loblaws family where they get certain amounts. But the thing is we're private, so the people that come to us, if they don't have these grants, they have the financial means to pay for support for their kids, and it
Hmm.
doesn't come cheap.
Yeah.
Now the thing is the families that don't, they go on waiting lists. And that's what really screws everyone over in Quebec. Because I'm going to tell you what happens. You see signs of autism. Even now, we diagnose as early as 18 months. What happens is you see a concern, you go on the list at Saint Justine or the Children's, and you're waiting for some kind of evaluation in the public sector. You get yourself set up with the social worker, and what happens is there's an age out where at a certain age, the government will not be able to intervene anymore.
What age is that?
That is by age 5. Well, they say it's by age 5, but by age 6 for sure.
They pull out.
So what happens is if you go on a list and there's a 2 or 3 year waiting list and you only see signs at age 3 or 4, they come out later.
You're done. You're getting very limited support.
Exactly. Your kid ages out and that's it. You're not getting that free evaluation or whatever. So if you need to go for a full autism diagnostic, you're running upwards.
This is new to me, man. This what you just said to me, I've never heard it before. Uh, so what happens with these parents? They have to go to the private sector, or they
So
have to wait for their kid to go in school and have one of their integration therapists kind of analyze the child? Or?
So more good question. So basically what happens is if a kid ages out, which is I want to say with our government by age 6 the latest, and they start school and they see there's problems, a child needs in the school boards what's called a code. And it's a code 56, a code 58 for autism, for whatever, in order to get the support of these integration aides, of the school team. Because like I said, the resources are there, but they're sparse. So what happens is if a kid ages out, you got to go to people like us. And a private evaluation for autism or ADHD is going to run you anywhere up to between low end 2,000 all the way up to 3,000. It's a lot of money for people, man.
Mhm.
So what happens is parents are at the mercy of the schools to do it. And the schools, a lot of the time, the school systems will do it. But guess what? There's not enough psychologists to do
Mhm.
it. So they might wait a while and they wait and they wait. And the child loses precious time. You know what it is for a kid between 4 and 6, that those 2 years, how much development they make.
Yeah.
So they end up, scraping their funds together and, coming to people like us. And we obviously try to work with families as much as we can, to make their child, progress and, try to help find them ways to, get funding or resources, but it's very hard. So, we hope that the government in the coming years are going to do more. And I really think they will, because the need is just on the rise.
Yeah.
It's not going away. I don't want to say a problem because it's not a problem, but the need is not going away. The need is rising. Public sector, private sector, middle class, upper class, lower class, it's everywhere. And we need to do something in order to help these people.
Obviously, it's a matter of resources, right? So, I mean, and when you're talking about public funds, you're going to give something, but you're going to have to take away some from somewhere else. You understand? It's all about balance. But I'm still interested in that integration thing. Do you think that the schools are, there's more and more schools now adopting uh, this um, uh, this style or this education where they're bringing in kids with disabilities, or is it still very much controlled? D- Does the government play a role in this? Does the government have to give the green light for this to happen, or how much autonomy do the schools have to proceed this way?
So the private schools have definitely much more autonomy because
Yeah.
they have less government involvement as long as they follow, the curriculum, en français and in English and, whatever. I think they're free to do what they want. And what happens in the private schools is we have a lot of staff that work in the private schools doing integration, and either the schools have applied for a grant. Let's take some of the Jewish day school systems. They get help from the Jewish community. We have a great, strong
Hmm.
community that will give monies allocated to the different schools, whether it's for literacy programs, for behavioral intervention, stuff like that. So the government has less involvement there, or sometimes the parents will pay out of pocket and be able to provide somebody. to help their child integrate. And that's a lot of the business we have is they'll contact us and say, the school's given us permission. Our child is, dealing with X, Y, and Z. Can we have somebody trained and sent into the school to work with them? And that's great. In terms of the public schools, what happens there is they really need the green light from the government. And we're going to go back to what we were saying before about proper assessments and evaluations to actually diagnose a child. If a child doesn't have that, unfortunately, the schools often have their hands tied, because if the child doesn't have a code, the government is not going to give them those hours per week that that child needs, because they can display all these behaviors, but it needs to be documented. So in case someone comes back at the school and say, hey, where are you allocating George, for example, who does integration and help these kids? Why is George working with child X? Where's the documentation? We need that.
So who's authorized to give out these diagnostics?
So diagnostics, that's exactly what my business partner is doing. So we can offer all the services. She's going to be able to do clinical assessments from early intervention.
Will they be recognized by the government?
Absolutely. So basically what happens is in order, I could write letters of support, I can write intervention plans, but I never went so far in education to do assessment. Number one, because I wanted to be more hands-on in training people and working with children. And number two is that at the time of my education, I didn't want to continue and pursue a doctorate. So what happens is in order to get a formal evaluation, let's take autism at a young age, a clinical psychologist will do what is called an ADOS and an ADIR. And those are a bunch of interviews of educators, teachers, parents, different, obviously testing with the child in a clinical environment setting, school observations, all that. And if they come to the criteria that the child meets enough of, what they're looking for and can check off enough boxes, and they meet a criteria for, let's say, autism, those are the type of assessments that are recognized either by the school boards or by private schools where somebody can be put into place to help these children.
How long does this procedure take usually?
Well, if you go private, you can get in with a private psychologist, pretty fast. A lot of them.
But all these interviews with teachers and all these other intervention
I would say
therapists.
if parents are paying out of pocket, they can. It depends what waiting lists are. It's again another good question. It depends, but I would say that all this can be really done in a short couple of months. But if you're waiting and you're at the mercy of other people, and you're talking about bureaucracy and the government and funding and the hospitals, you could be waiting a couple of years.
It's crazy to think how much room to grow exists, like you mentioned, between 4 and 6 or whatever age. It really doesn't matter. And to know as well that there's all these delays, it's just a loss, I think. I want to talk to you a little bit about detection, how important it is to detect early, how you do it, what the process is, and that sort of thing.
Okay. So basically for certain developmental disabilities, we don't look at them until the child is a little bit older. So for example, like just to get out of the way, for ADHD, we're now doing earlier screening, but we won't look at ADHD until around the age 4. That's really the earliest. Now, autism, I said before, I think I gave the number 18 months. That's where psychologists now, whereas 3-4 years ago almost would barely, some of them wouldn't even look at them. Now we're starting to look at detection and even evaluating at a young age of as young as 18 months, 2 years old. Now what to look for? Obviously their speech, in terms of, not talking or stuff like that. But parents who are listening to this, do not be scared about what I'm saying, because oftentimes they are delays. And that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your child. I'll take my own daughter, for example, who's now 17 months and just took her first steps over the Christmas break. And everyone's saying she's delayed, and that didn't worry me. So whatever I'm about to tell you, don't get nervous.
Yeah.
But what do we look for? We look for language delays. We look for issues with eye contact. We look for lapse in socialization. So when an adult goes into the room and says, hey Georgie, I'm so excited to see you. Sorry for that voice. We expect the child to turn around and engage with that adult. So we look for those signs of social interaction. We look at how they play, with toys. Are they going to roll the car back and forth and go vroom vroom, or are they going to hold up the car and just start spinning the wheel? So we look at all these little things, and a lot of that can be easily detected, just by doing an observation in a home or in a daycare. But the thing is, sometimes there's some of these delays, but it doesn't mean that all these delays qualify,
Yeah.
for an autism diagnosis.
uh,
I can go on, but I don't want to bore
no, no,
people.
but you're not going to bore anyone. Because I'm still stuck to what you said about that gap that exists between uh, the early detection and the actual diagnosis, and the time that you can actually take advantage of to make whatever difference in some child's development. How like how much impact can you make depending on that gap of time that you have where it's important to actually get that detection uh done.
Um, so basically, it goes like this. A lot of the phone calls that we get are from parents that are either on a waiting list in the public sector, or they've been alerted by the child's teacher or by educators that there's some of these signs that I just pointed out before, and they don't even have a diagnosis, but they want to start intervention right away,
Hmm.
whether it's speech therapy, occupational therapy, ABA therapy, which is based on applied behavior analysis. Excuse me, I talked about it before, and oftentimes they'll start intervention before we even open the door to a diagnosis, and the kids start to make gains.
Hmm.
So even if they're waiting for that diagnosis, it's never too early to start working with your child and try to target it. And I think sometimes what happens is culturally you have parents that really don't want it. They know something could be wrong, right?
They just don't
Parents.
want to accept it, right? Yeah.
Exactly. They know their child the best, but they don't want to accept it. And you know what? Unfortunately, that I know it's a tough pill to swallow, but you got to have open eyes. And sometimes, I wear two hats. I wear my professional hat, but sometimes I look at my own kid
Yeah.
and I have problems, seeing what maybe I should be seeing if I was looking at her, elsewhere. Again, I told you guys she was late walking. Well, guess what? When she was about just over a year, about 12 months, I noticed that she would do, everything developmentally that she should be doing, but she really wasn't moving. And everyone was joking, oh, she's so lazy, this and that. So I called in a childhood physiotherapist, and I started doing physio sessions with her to teach me and my wife how to get my daughter moving,
Hmm.
because I knew it would happen, but I wanted to expedite the process.
Hmm.
And it was amazing. And this person that worked with her, who was a colleague of mine, got my daughter to start rolling over and moving and doing all these things. And that's important. So early detection, no matter what you're looking at, is super, super important to your kid's development. No matter what you see or don't see, you got to say, okay, well, there's something. How can I help them?
Hmm. I imagine that depending on where specifically with a case of autism, depending on where it's situated on the spectrum, there's cases that are easier to deal with than others.
Yep. So we call it an autism spectrum disorder because there's so many kids that function very highly. And these are the kids that are, integrated into private schools or the school system. And, they have their support, and, they have extra time for tests or whatever recommendations, professional makes for their learning and their behavior. But then we have the kids, who are, higher up on the spectrum, which means that they're, lower functioning and they have more challenges. And there's excellent, excellent resources for these kids too. Unfortunately, here we go back to the waiting list. So you had mentioned before Summit School, an excellent school, Giant Steps,
Giant steps, yeah, I know.
an excellent school. That is a school for children with autism located in the West End of Montreal. And again, this is like your TISO comment earlier on. This is not a plug for any of these schools because I have nothing to do with them. I just think they're great. So we have Summit School, we have Giant Steps. We also have a school called Peter Hall. Now, Peter Hall is a school where children on the spectrum or other developmental delays will be able to go for a full school day. And a lot of these kids struggle emotionally, developmentally, behaviorally, more so than other kids. They'll have more violent outbursts and
Hmm.
stuff like that. And the ratios there are set up in a way that these kids are really properly, we hope, want to say, really well taken care of. So these kids, are not, I don't want to say a burden to their parents, but they go out every day so mom and dad could work, and these kids get, their own type of education. And these are the kids that struggle more, but there's a place for them. Now, a lot of these places, we wish we could just call up, Summit School. But the thing is it doesn't work on who you know. It doesn't work on a donation. It doesn't work like that. There's waiting lists, and we need more of these places to be able to help these children,
Yeah.
because there's a spectrum, and not all kids can be integrated. Although that's our hope.
Yeah. Um, why is autism on the rise?
$1 million question, nobody knows. Autism can be on the rise for all sorts of things. And I want parents who are listening and have concerns about their kid to, if you didn't listen to this last 59 minutes, I want you to listen to this. Okay. I'm going to answer your question. Please don't be fooled by everything you read out there in articles, all sorts of therapies. If you're going out to help your child because you have concerns, make sure that you have somebody who has experience, who you've checked out, either referred by, a hospital, by your pediatrician, who you've looked at on Psychology Today, who you've read up about, because there's all sorts of therapies out there. And I'm not saying they don't work, but parents who are desperate, I mean, I know, speaking from experience, who has a young daughter, I would do anything to help my kid. And there's all sorts of therapies out there. They talk about oxygen therapy, dolphin assisted therapy, where parents will spend, tens of thousands of dollars to bring their child to these specialists, travel to the United States or to these places to help their kids. And the truth is, I'm not saying that these things don't work. I'm saying look for things that are scientifically validated, that and have researched, and by professionals here have helped your child. So ask me your question again, because I went off on a little
Yeah, you
tangent.
did, but
And
it's
I want,
okay. I'm just curious to know, like, scientifically, why is autism on the rise? I mean, and this is factual, right? I'm not.
right. So it's factual. It is on the rise. When I was in grad school, the numbers was one, I think, in 60 for boys,
Yeah,
and now I think they're in the United States, because this is more from the American Association. I think they would say about 1 in 50 or 1 in 55, but listeners, don't quote me on this.
that's insane, man.
But it's very high, much more so for boys than girls.
Yeah,
Again, can't answer that. Can't answer why. Why is it on the rise? People will say it's everything from environment. They'll say, oh, there's certain, parts of Montreal where, the pollution is so bad, so autism is on the rise there. There's studies that say it's lack of love and affection from parents.
Yeah.
You're giving me these eyebrows now, because, like, what the hell
Yeah,
is this?
yeah.
So there's all sorts of things. And the reality is nobody has an answer. But the thing is, I tell parents, it doesn't matter, because we treat what we see. So eventually, I might be out of a job because we might find, a cure, quote unquote. But don't listen to these bullshits, for people trying to sell parents who are in a vulnerable state about curing autism. There's no cure. There's ways to learn to deal with it. There's ways to learn to cope with it. And a lot of these kids are very smart, and they become very successful
Yeah.
children, teenagers, young adults, and members of society, just like you and I.
Yeah, you've heard of this, obviously, and I'm gonna say it here because the one thing that I keep hearing more often is the vaccines. Yeah, you made a face. Is there anything related to that? Is it just a coincidence? What's the science behind that?
Okay, so this is such an important.
And by no means are we suggesting parents not to do the
Right.
vaccines, but it just seems that coincidentally that 18-month-old vaccine, or the which one is it, the 4 to 5 year
It's the
one?
MMR. So basically, this is such, again, like, obviously, listeners, George did his research on these questions he's asking me. We spent a lot of time, even when I was studying in school, on how to answer these types of questions, and I'm really glad I know about it enough to be able to inform people. So basically, there was one study done, okay, one study that really caused the whole upheaval. It was by a doctor named Andrew Wakefield, and he put out an article specifically about the MMR vaccine. So parents who have kids, the MMR vaccine is measles, mumps, rubella. And there was this study that was published by this guy, basically saying that that this vaccine is a cause of autism. This article was later removed, and he lost his medical license to practice. There is no scientific validity that vaccines cause autism or harm for children. Yes, you're giving your child something that, you're putting them through something, even a flu shot that, could be giving them, a little bit of, the opposite of an we'll give them antibodies, but give them something that, causes them to get a fever and be sick. And, parents are saying that, how can I give my kid this and make them sick at a young age? There's no evidence about this. So guys, my personal advice, people will go against me. My kid had all her vaccines. I will do that for all my kids. Parents who call our clinic and ask the questions, there is no validity. I'm a very science-based guy, and there is nothing published out there or written that vaccines specifically the MMR cause autism. So if anyone is asking what's this guy's opinion, it's 100% vaccinate your kids. If for some reason, people want to split them up because there's a lot of vaccines that are very close together, split them up. But do what's best for your kids. Speak to your pediatricians, read and educate yourselves so you know that you're doing the best for your kid.
Obviously, the pediatricians are going to suggest, and they're gonna push the parents to vaccinate their kids. But it's just weird that at that age that you mentioned, where usually the earlier signs are around 18 months, um, 18 months and 2 years, and just incidentally, that's when those vaccines are done. I went through it with my wife. There was no doubt in my mind that I was gonna I was gonna vaccinate my kids. But I won't lie to you. There was a part of me that was kind of doubting it at some point. I was, you're scared because you're reaching that point, and obviously, as a new parent, you're reading a lot on kids' health and behavioral stuff, and you want to learn and you want to be the best parent that you can be. And a lot of the literature out there talks about this issue.
Yeah, it's still very hotly talked about, and if you're going to read up on it, make sure that you're reading, articles and speaking to people who are proper practitioners. And I want people to know that, years ago, lots of pediatricians did these vaccines, and now most of the time, like I know my daughter's pediatrician office doesn't even do these vaccines. Parents are going either to private clinics or mostly to
Hmm.
CLSCs to do it.
Hmm.
So it's not like a cash grab for people or anything like that. People and parents are giving these kids their vaccines, and professionals are telling them to do it because research is showing that this is what's beneficial to the child. It's not to say that you were talking about age, that things can't develop, whether it's something minor or something really concerning. But if a parent calls me up and says like, oh my gosh, if I give my kid the vaccine and they're going to stop talking and developing and develop autism, that's a very big statement. And again, find me the research that says that that can actually happen.
Yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, you're much more specialized in that, but I know personally, a couple families that are dealing with autism, and in most cases, it appeared around that age, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
so
and
so
and
the
and and in without exception, every single one of them, they've told me like the kid was just perfect,
yes.
interacting well, laughing well, playing well, showing signs of speech, saying a couple words here and there, and then just from one day to the next after that vaccine, boom, it was like, what happened?
So I want listeners to understand that with autism, what's really scary is, first of all, you don't develop autism. Okay, that's a big myth. The signs don't come out till later, but for lack of better expression or words, um, autism, you're born with it. There's no signs that show it early on, but there's earlier detection. Now you were saying 18 months to 2 years. That's when we diagnose, but often signs come out later, right? I mean, if you just look at any like good validated website, or speak to any doctor, or read a decent book, we talk about child development, and you see a child develop right from birth, and there's 4-month milestones, 3-month milestones, 6 months milestones. So we watch for those, and a lot of times is because there's delays in development and stuff like that, like I even mentioned with my own daughter, with her walking and her movements and stuff. The thing is often those things develop around that time, the 18 months, the 2-year time frame, where people become like, oh my gosh, now they're not doing this and this. And that's that pivotal age. Is it possible that it comes in conjunction or in the same time frame as a certain vaccine? Yes, but guys, educate yourselves, like I said, and know that vaccinating your kids is not going to cause autism or another developmental delay.
Hmm. Um, Talk to me about the parents that you work with. And talk to me a little, and it's obviously very difficult to have this conversation, but talk to me a little bit about the setting. How are parents? How do you break that barrier? Like you said before, certain parents, they're reluctant to admit certain signs and certain developmental disabilities that their child may be having. Talk to me about a little bit about the parents. How do you approach them? How do you deal with that situation? It's obviously very fragile. It's very I'm imagining it's a pretty emotional thing for the parent to be told that their child has mental disabilities or autism or whatever other disabilities you work with.
So basically, when kids come to me without a diagnosis, and the parents ask me, do you think, they'll ask this famous line, do you think he's autistic? And I say he because 90% of the
It's
clients,
boys,
it's
yes.
boys that come through our door. They ask me these questions, and the beauty of what I do is I don't do assessment. So I cannot tell a parent, yes, your child is on the spectrum. Do I see signs? Do I see signs and know in my head, there's big concerns? 100%. But I'm not the one, to give the news. I will explain the news. If there's a nice 20-page assessment, I'll explain to them how intervention should work based on, what was found by the doctor or the psychologist. But I basically treat what I see. So I'll put an intervention plan together. If they want their child to go, to a private Greek school, for example, and the school's willing to accept their kid, I'll put a plan in place, to help that child integrate. And it doesn't matter ASD, ADHD, CD, ODD. It doesn't matter what it says on paper for me, because I'm going to treat what I see. So when parents work with me, I understand. I say, this is your child. I'm doing the best for them. Do parents ever get emotional? Of course, all the time. And I try to do my best, to have empathy for them and understand their situation. And my business partner always told me, when we first started, wait till you're a parent. It's going to hit you so
Yeah.
differently. And now it does hit me differently, but I do my best to try to be very objective and say, this is what we're dealing with. And this is what we're going to try to do to help it. And these are the people we're going to bring in, and this is what we're going to do. And parents who come to us, they obviously want to help their child. So they're, whether they're in denial, or not, they've made that phone call to us, and they've come through
Yeah, that
the
first step
doors,
is done.
and so they want to help their child. And yes, sometimes there's severe meltdowns, and a child will, become aggressive in school, or do property destruction, or hit their sibling or their parents, and something, major could happen, and there'll be these breakdowns. But the thing is we bounce back, and we say, look at all this potential progress we can make with their child.
Yeah.
So really, I always tell parents, it's a team approach, and it's the families, it's the professionals, it's the doctors, it's the paraprofessionals, it's the school, and we all work together to best help a kid.
How difficult or how easy is it for you to kind of draw the line? Because I imagine that working with families so closely, um, there's a certain sense of attachment, right? I mean, you become part of this whole process. You grow up with their child, you grow up in their environment. uh has there ever been a moment where you get attached to the child, to the family, and then something, there's bad news, right? I mean, th- that emotional connection that you have with the child and the families, do you try to kind of draw the line, or is it something that you just have to go with?
It's very, very, very hard because, as someone who does what I do, we become very attached to the client. When I say the client, I don't necessarily mean, the parents or the siblings or the school. I mean the child
because
that we're
aside
working with.
because aside from the child that you're trying to help, there's all this other ecosystem, right?
Right. So theoretically, what we do, within this ecosystem, as you say, is like, we try to draw barriers in line. So for example, if a family invites me to their house for dinner, for example, I would never accept.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed. Families, will try to, give gifts to us, and, we don't accept. We're careful with that. But we do build a connection to these kids. And, I will have parents text me after hours or on the weekends, or, or call me in a panic. Just this past summer, a little boy who I oversee his case, he had ran away from home,
Mm.
and the parents live in the West Island of Montreal, close enough to me, and I got into my car to help find this young boy because his parents were frantic. And is that out of my line of duty? Yes, yes, it absolutely is. And you contact the police and you do all this and that. But I could just picture, this mom and dad frantic about not knowing where their kid left. What would happen when he crosses the street, stuff like that. So we do get emotionally involved. Luckily, I have the most amazing wife. There's my plug to compliment you, Audrey, who really understands. And from the day she met me, she knew how important it was to do my work. So yes, I try to draw boundaries and keep, as much as I can private. But and I do that. But yeah, it affects you. It affects you in more ways than one. And you want to do your best to be the best you can be to help these families.
How is it for families dealing with this? Obviously, it's difficult. There isn't one single parent that would want to go through this, but in your experience, I mean,
It's
Yeah, tell me a
it's
little bit about
different
this.
types of burdens, George, because the thing is like, listen, you have families that have, a lot of, financial means, and they could pay, for all types of support and stuff like that. And obviously money is not the answer to things, but, it helps when you're coming to a place like ABC Solutions, where we don't have government funding, where we don't have government funding, and parents have to a lot of the time pay out of pocket for services. So that helps. Obviously, lots of times when there's a child with a lot of difficulties, whether it's autism or anything like that, it causes a big strain on the family unit, and there's a lot of times that families become divorced because of it.
Hmm.
And you're dealing with single parents or joint custody, and that is also big potential issues, because kids with special needs, they need routine and they need structure, and often they're living in two houses. They have mom and dad who are always dealing with things differently, and fighting, and that's really difficult. So the thing is, there's all sorts of situations. It could be parental situations. Sometimes I have families with more than one sibling that has anxiety, or or special needs or behavioral issues, and when it's more than one kid, it becomes a new challenge. But most of the time, I'm dealing with parents that are really optimistic, and they see their kids progress, especially if you attack these things early on. And there's really a lot of positives in what we see. And I always try to tell parents, when they're having a hard day, look at where you came from.
Hmm.
Look at where their starting point is, and look at where your kid is now. He's sitting in school. Your kid has friends. Your kid has play dates. Your kid is sitting at the dinner table with you, and we celebrate these little, these small things that people take for granted. And I remind parents of, what they should be celebrating day to day.
Do you see any of that progress in the more advanced cases?
What do you mean by that?
Like you mentioned, the kids being integrated in school and having friends and living a more or less similar life to other kids. Uh, the kids that have a more severe disability, like for example in the autism spectrum, um, do you see such a pronounced advancement and betterment in their situation, or it's more, it's more difficult in those cases?
Now I understand your question. So basically, the thing is like, we're looking at celebrating different things, right? So like the child that's being integrated, what might be a parent's dream for them to be able to have a friend who wants to come over, so they can learn to share toys.
Hmm.
And that's a lot of stuff that my staff will work with them in therapy. Then for the kids who are higher up on the spectrum and have more difficulty function, we might celebrate, for example, that they get toilet trained at age 6, or that they learn how to request, for water instead of screaming on the floor. So it's not that, the advancements are more or less, it's that the advancements and the celebrations and the milestones are different,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I want people to also to be aware that, sometimes people will say, we're professionals, or, doctors, whatever, your child, is, very severe, and, they might not be able to ever learn to speak and stuff like that. Still go ahead and fight the fight for your child, because oftentimes your kids are going to surprise you, and they're going to do amazing things, and they're going to beat those odds, and they're going to be able to develop more so than people think they will.
Where are we right now, and where do you think we should be headed, and what work needs to be done in terms of detection and the whole science of it?
So detection is there. Early detection is super important, and I think that's great. I think what we really need is, we really need to be able to tell, the people high up, at the provincial and federal level, this is what's going on. This is society now. How are we going to help these kids? Because these kids are our future. And the most important thing, and it comes down to it in all walks of life, is money and funding, and being able to say, hey, this is what this child needs. This is going to help their development. And I said to you guys at the beginning that my education is not based on hypobaric chamber therapy, or or all sorts of hullabaloo that people might think of. But my training is based on stuff that's scientifically validated, that has studies and hundreds of thousands of hours of research, and case studies and all that. And they need to see that these are the things that we can do to help our kids. And what do we need for it? We need money, we need understanding. And a lot of what I've been doing in the past few years is going around and doing things like this, and educating people so they understand what is autism. I could tell you that if I brought a bunch of kids that I work with here to sit in the studio with us, they would be interested, they would be engaged, they would be talking to you, they would be making eye contact, and you would say to me after, bro, this kid doesn't have special needs. Like they're amazing
Hmm.
because these kids are just like, my kids and your kids, and they're learning to be part of society, and they're learning to contribute, and they're learning to do all the things that kids need to do.
Hmm.
So we have to continue to educate. We have to continue to fight for them. We have to continue to get money and resources and allocations so we can help families, help schools, and help kids.
Hmm. Let's close it up, man. Tell me what you're working on. What's new? What's coming up for your company? What are you working on right now? And what are we going to be
So
looking
our
into?
our big thing now, if people hit up our website,
Yeah, sure. Plug it in, man. Go ahead.
www.solucionadc.ca, I'm sure Georgie will post our website up there. But what we're doing a lot of now, which ties into what we've been talking about, is we're doing a lot of online trainings. So we have a whole company that we teamed up with in the States, and we've made different types of trainings, parent trainings, paraprofessional trainings, which are people that work in the school systems, professional trainings, teacher trainings. And a lot of times, because people have full-time jobs, they will sign up online, and it's off of our website. We have a list of our trainings there, and we run virtual classes, and people get educated because there's such a need. And so we're really moving towards this online education. So people that work full-time or have children could learn, whether it's for their classroom, for their own child in their home, how to best do it. And we have tons and tons of trainings, whether it's um, learning to deal with tantrums, whether it's behavior training, whether it's helping kids speak, whether it's we have a whole training on how to teach children to be potty trained, all sorts of stuff. So we're moving a lot towards these online trainings, and I've been doing myself and my partner a lot of workshops. For early interventionists, for daycare educators, for teachers, because the thing is if you take a teacher who's been teaching for 20, 30 years, unfortunately, they might be great teachers, but they don't know what I know. So when these children are being sent to their classrooms, they have to know how to best help them. So that's where we're moving into the education, I hope.
That's nice. Uh, One last question. It just dawned on me, and obviously it's more political because that's what I know more. Is there a lobby? Is there a movement? Is there an organization that is much more political, trying to raise awareness with our leaders? Where's that at?
So you know what? When I left politics, and even on Facebook pages, people will tag me in posts or my company and ask questions. I really try to stay away from that. Now I don't ignore the questions. I'll answer people privately. So I don't think I have the best answer to that, but I know in the States there's a lot of lobbyist groups. There's an organization called Autism Speaks, which some people find controversial, that is really trying to to lobby for for funding and families and stuff like that. And in Quebec, I don't know exactly what it was, but there was recently in the past year or so, with our government, a grant that was allocated for. I don't think it was specifically for intervention, but it was a step in the right direction for assessment and stuff like that. So obviously, we need more of that, and the best people to speak on that behalf is
Hmm.
parents of children with special needs, because they will be, there's an expression, you are your child's best advocate. So there's professionals like me that might have the knowledge, but we don't have the heart like the parents do. And it's the parents that are really, the best people to fight for their kids.
And is there anything out there that you know of, or?
There are things out there. I don't know specifics on, what's out there or not. There's all sorts of groups on online. I know a lot of times, groups go to Ottawa, and they, and they're fighting for more hours of integration and more support. And listen, they must be doing something, because recognition is on the rise and support is on the rise. It's obviously still not enough, especially with the growing number of diagnostics that's coming out.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's groups out there, and I don't know enough about them, and I wish there was more. So in my field, what I'm just trying to do is educate myself more and more each day, doing my best to help these families.
Dude, I want to thank you for coming, man. I know that you're a busy guy, and I appreciate the time that you took. Good luck, man. Honestly, you're doing. I think it's very valuable, the work that you're doing and the commitment that you have, not only towards these children but to their families as well. Um, I enjoyed seeing you again, man.
I,
Honestly,
feeling is very mutual, my man.
don't call me because I won't go for coffee. But
You won't go for coffee, no drinks. But if you have a watch question, you'll ask me. And if you have a developmental question about your kids, you may ask me.
no, I'm just joking, bro. We should do this more often. And I know that you're busy now with your little family, and I know how much time, uh, how time is precious and how you can get caught up with all these different things. I appreciate it though, man. It was nice seeing you.
It was absolutely my pleasure.